And the guy at the flight school went ahead over his boss's wishes and called the FBI and said, I'm really worried about this guy. And then they went to the court, got the warrant, they searched the guy's house, and they found papers that had been in his pockets and at his house, directly connecting them to the hijackers in Florida.
So recently, Scott Horton went on Tucker Carlson's podcast talking a little bit about the truth regarding U.S. foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks, the tracking of the deep state of the hijackers, and what information we know about it that could have tipped them off to the attacks but has been ignored. And lots of information has come out about this and is being buried by modern journalism. Surprise, surprise. So let's see what Scott has to say about this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
One last thing, though, about Bill Clinton's treason in supporting al-Qaeda in Chechnya is that you might remember Colleen Rowley. She was Time Magazine Person of the Year in 2002 because she was the lawyer for the FBI office in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who could have stopped September 11th, her and her team. Because what happened was there's a guy named Zacharias Moussaoui, and they said he was the 20th hijacker, except I don't think that's right. I think Katani was the 20th hijacker, and this guy was for a different mission later, but whatever. Point is, he's the guy who famously wanted to learn how to fly a jumbo jet, but wasn't so interested in how to take off or land.
Right.
And the guy at the flight school went ahead over his boss's wishes and called the FBI and said, I'm really worried about this guy. And the FBI office out in Minneapolis, they did their job immediately. And one of their guys even speculated, this guy says he wants to learn how to fly. Like somehow he's particularly interested in the route from Heathrow to JFK. I think he might want to crash into the World Trade Center. So they went to FBI headquarters in Washington, and they were denied, no, you cannot even ask the FISA court for a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant to search this guy's stuff. And the reason why is because even though in Minneapolis, they had contacted the European intelligence agencies, and the French reported back, oh, we know this guy. Him and his brother both are Chechen terrorists. They fought in the war in Chechnya and are recruiters for the bin Ladenites in Chechnya, led by Khattab and Basiev, both of whom were bin Ladenites, both of whom were directly tied to bin Laden, both of whom had traveled to Afghanistan numerous times. People might even remember that there was a detachment of Chechens fighting with the Taliban against the Northern Alliance at the time that our war started in 2001.
So all this is true. Scott is well, educated on these matters, and this documentation exists to show this, that several of the hijackers did fight in Chechnya, but also we know that 2 of the 9/11 hijackers were actually identified by the FBI prior to the hijackings, and information that's come out in the last 2 years, again, that's been completely buried, seems to suggest either they were CIA agents or the CIA tried to recruit them as agents to get on the inside of Al-Qaeda. Because what had happened, and again, don't take my word for this, look out on the internet. A few stories have been posted about this over the last few years, even by mainstream publications, that Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar, 2 of the hijackers, I believe they lived in Los Angeles and San Diego to some extent, were basically minding their own business in America, where a Saudi national named Omar al-Bayoumi stumbled upon them. He said, hey, I'm just going to be charitable. I'm going to help them pay their rent, help them get their driver's license, basically situate them in the United States. Well, it turns out that we know that al-Bayoumi was a Saudi intelligence agent. He was part of the CIA, the Saudi version of the CIA. It's called the GIP, the General Intelligence Presidency of Saudi Arabia. And it looks like the CIA, because of whistleblowers have exposed this, the CIA used al-Bayoumi as a proxy to try to recruit these folks to get on the inside of Al-Qaeda. But, this seems to have encouraged the hijackings at the very least, rather than recruiting them as inside men. This is something that's totally buried. Scott's right about some of the other hijackers, but this is the truth, and, Americans aren't ready to wake up to it, I don't think, yet. I wish they were.
Because bin Laden had assigned them to what was called the 055 Brigade to go and help the Taliban to fight against the Northern Alliance. So that's what they were doing there. Is there's this... they absolutely were bin Ladenite terrorists in the exact Al-Qaeda sense that you would think of them in any other place in Chechnya. But FBI headquarters said, we like the terrorists in Chechnya. They're not terrorists. They're freedom fighters.
Because they're fighting Putin.
Because they're fighting Putin. And so we're not against them, we're for them. And so no, you can't have your FISA warrant. Now, a FISA warrant is unlike a Fourth Amendment warrant. Fourth Amendment, they have to have probable cause, particularly describing the places to be searched and the persons or things to be seized to find evidence of a crime. They have to be able to convince the judge that it's more likely than not they're going to find evidence of this crime there. Well, for a FISA warrant, it's nothing like that. For a FISA warrant, all they need is a reasonable belief, which is nothing, that a person is either an agent of a foreign power or of a foreign terrorist group.
I've been surveilled under a FISA warrant, so I'm very aware.
You know what? I have too. Antiwar.com got surveilled in this same illegal way.
Of course they have, and FISA 702 is at the root of so much, destruction and desecration of the Fourth Amendment and the safeguard that all Americans should have against warrantless searches and seizures. And guess who was the chief architect in Congress of extending that? It's the current CIA director, John Ratcliffe. And what FISA 702 allows the government to do is, if you happen to be communicating with someone that the deep state calls a terrorist, just by coincidence, if you are communicating with them, it subjects you to unreasonable searches and seizures that are not unlike all the perversions of the Fourth Amendment that transpired in the past. That was one of the reasons why the American Revolution was fought, the War for Independence. The general writs of assistance that were applied in Massachusetts to try to stop smuggling were arbitrarily used against the colonists in pernicious ways that violated their privacy. The famous patriot James Otis had a rousing speech condemning them in early 1760s, and that was, in many people's eyes, kindling for the fire that would light the flame of American independence. So Scott is right. FISA is a pernicious, tyrannical scheme.
And so, yeah, they can get a FISA warrant for you and me, Tucker, but not for Zacharias Moussaoui. So even on September 11th, they said, now can we have our warrant? And now can we talk to the judge? And they still were told no by FBI headquarters. And it wasn't until later that night that the director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, said, I wonder if this has anything to do with that Minneapolis thing. And then they went to the court, got the warrant, they searched the guy's house, and they found papers that had been in his pockets and at his house, directly connecting them to the hijackers in Florida. They could have wrapped up, completely rolled up, and prevented the September 11th attack if they'd just been allowed to do their job. And they weren't, because why? Because Bill Clinton was committing high treason, supporting the same bin Ladenites who had already attacked our towers, who had already killed our guys in Saudi Arabia, who'd already blown up our embassies, already attacked our battleship.
Yeah, he's talking about the Khobar Towers bombing and the bombing of the USS Cole, and the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. That was also linked to Al-Qaeda. So there was a long history of Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks on America's soil in terms of the World Trade Center that was thankfully stopped before the bomb exploded. Before the disaster would have struck and taken many lives. I believe the bomb did get lit and did explode, but also attacks on the USS Cole and the Khobar Towers and the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania that I believe happened in 98. But this isn't just high treason on the part of Bill Clinton. This goes back a long time. The U.S. decided deliberately to fund Pakistan's ISI and providing arms to the Mujahideen when the Russians were invading Afghanistan in, I believe, 1979, and that war went on until, I believe, 1989. They're essentially there for a decade under the support of the U.S., funneling arms through Pakistan's version of the CIA called the ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence. And many of those Mujahideen, split off into factions. Some of them became Al-Qaeda. Some of them became part of the Taliban. Some of them became part of the Northern Alliance that fought against the Taliban for years and years. And, that's disastrous. But that is the long-standing U.S. foreign policy, is to fund these rebellious factions in other countries, and they always bite you back in the end.
And they said, well, whatever. We like these guys when they're killing Russians. And the same thing in August of 2001, Delta Force, that's top tier Army Special Operations Forces, Delta Force had been training KLA terrorists, bin Ladenite terrorists in Kosovo, who then invaded Macedonia in an attempt to create a greater Kosovo.
Yeah.
And they were wrapped up by Macedonian troops.
Kill more Christians.
And ferried out of the country by the Americans. And this is just 1 month before the September 11th attack. And I know a lot of people just think that these guys are totally controlled by the United States. But my point of view is that no, what happened is they are essentially motivating them to attack the United States in one place while supporting them in other places. And rather than buying their loyalty, they're just blinding themselves to the danger. And so they kept attacking us and attacking us and attacking us, which was very convenient to notice when you're trying to still support them. And so even though you had people like Michael Scheuer at the CIA's bin Laden unit, who I think is sincere, all he wanted to do in life was kill al-Qaeda guys. And, you know, they had the rendition program. That was in Clinton. That was before Bush. You might be familiar with the statement by Robert Baer, the former CIA officer. He said, if you want an interrogation, you send them to Jordan. If you want them tortured, you send them to Syria. If you want them to disappear forever, you send them to Egypt. And he was talking about the Clinton years. So they were wrapping up guys who they considered to be the most dangerous al-Qaeda terrorists and sending them back home to be taken out and shot.
Yeah, if people that are watching this don't know who Michael Scheuer is, he's a legend. He's one of the best foreign policy dissidents. He actually headed the bin Laden unit that tracked bin Laden through the 90s when he was a terrorist, when the U.S. already had a bounty on his head for the atrocities he committed against U.S. servicemen. And the USS Cole, connections to the Khobar Towers, the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, and al-Qaeda had started in the late 80s. Scheuer headed this unit designed to track him, so we know that there was intelligence looking out for what al-Qaeda was doing within our own government, and he blew the cover off this. He exposed what it was, and U.S. involvement in the Middle East is always tragic and always blows up in our face, but Michael Scheuer is right about all the substantive things. His book Imperial Hubris is fantastic. Everyone should get that. It shows how the war on terror was perverted to curtail the civil liberties of Americans, and it was designed to perpetuate a long-standing ambiguous war, not a war that would have been successful in toppling these regimes and destroying these terrorists, but one that would fester terrorism and cause it to expand. Amazing book.
So that was going on during that time. And in fact, there's a huge and hilarious and important and tragic and crazy clip of Michael Scheuer, again, the chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit.
I know him, yeah.
Testifying before the House. And the congressman asked him about a statement that he had made about John O'Neill, the head of the FBI counterterrorism unit in New York. And he said, the only thing good that happened to America on 11 September is that tower came down on John O'Neill's head. Because that was how bad the CIA and the FBI hated each other in their fight over the intelligence.
This is why Scheuer no longer does television.
This is why Scheuer no longer does. He went a little nutty in later years. Yeah. His book, Imperial Hubris, is bar none the best book on the terror wars from that era.
I haven't seen him in many, many years.
Me either,
he was...
Yeah, Imperial Hubris, obligatory reading as far as I'm concerned. If you're interested in U.S. foreign policy and want to know the truth, the unvarnished truth, not what you hear from MSNBC and CNN and the whole hate us for our freedom crowd. Remember that war propaganda campaign that we had to invade Iraq and, topple the Taliban because they hate us for our freedom. That campaign that wouldn't print what Osama bin Laden actually said about the reasons for which he attacked the United States, for which al-Qaeda existed, namely U.S. support for Israel, the militarization of the Arabian Peninsula, especially since the 1990s and the Gulf War, and the sanctions regime placed upon Iraq, which ended up killing perhaps 500,000 people. Those are the actual reasons, not the fact that, he stumbled upon a copy of the Bill of Rights out in the desert and was just so irate at America because of that. No, it's what the CIA acknowledged as blowback, that there are foreign policy consequences for heightened militarism and expansive empire building in the Middle East. Even the CIA acknowledged that at the time. So that's where we're at. Scott's entirely right. There was some foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks, and declassified documents from only 2022 show that al-Bayoumi, the Saudi intelligence agent that had interactions with two of the hijackers I talked about a little bit earlier, even the FBI at this point concludes, and we know this by a declassified memo, that he had 50-50 knowledge of that the attacks were going to happen. Foreknowledge. This is the guy that the CIA worked with, according to CIA whistleblowers. to recruit those two hijackers for the CIA. That's where we're at. This could have been stopped, but, you know, it doesn't seem like it behooved neocons to stop it. Neocons wanted to push their foreign policy agenda and their domestic policy agenda, because with the war on terror, the two terror wars primarily during Bush's term, we also got the Patriot Act, the DHS, the beginnings of mass data collection and mass surveillance that Edward Snowden exposed. And we got, you know, expansive warrantless wiretapping and FISA, all this treacherous policy, this big government policy, because of the neocons. And this is why I have a certain disdain for them that I have toward no others. Not even, you know, the progressive left that falls in line with this. The neocons were the architects of the most disastrous era of U.S. foreign policy in American history. Undoubtedly is basically the time in which we live through, and that's why. But I do want to hear from what you guys think about this. Let me know in the comments below. Is Scott Horton right about foreknowledge, about the 9/11 attacks? Any other missed stories about this that you guys don't see covered in the media? And what would it take for Americans to actually dig into this stuff and kind of sift through and reject the corporate media narratives to learn the truth about this and dive into the declassified documents that show this? Let me know in the comments below. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Please consider becoming a YouTube member to support the channel. And if you do that by clicking the join button down below, you also get advanced viewing of all of my videos before they come out on YouTube. And I'd really appreciate that support. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.